Welcome back to the podcast. Hello, guys. This episode's going to be a little bit deep into the shadow. Shadow work is, there's a lot of hype in the spiritual world about shadow work and getting access to our shadow. Our shadow is our unconscious. It is the self that we are unaware of. So our ego is the self that we're aware of. And our shadow is that piece where it can feel very dark, but it doesn't have to be dark. It's just like the parts that you just don't know about yourself. Anyways, so I was reading my book, Womb.Awakening. So if you're watching on video, this is what the book looks like. It's kind of like, it's like a thick, textbook. It feels like a textbook for my womb. And I have been working through this. So we're going to talk about original source of shadow patterns is that specific topic. But I had just started my bleed on Sunday. This will come out on Friday. So I started my bleed on Sunday. Is the full moon yesterday, or last night rather, on the 23rd in Scorpio. And last weekend I had a full weekend of very deep ancestral healing. So we'll talk about shadow and we'll talk about ancestral healing because that also came up today during my colonic. So there's just a lot of things that'll be weaved into this episode specifically to do with healing. And this something that I think in many of us on the journeys of this spiritual path, it could be one of those things that we kind of hit last or that we avoid because it's uncomfortable. We don't really want to access it. We are focused on the really cool things we get into. At least that's how I was. I was let me get connected to my star family and what's my soul purpose and all this kind of stuff. And you kind of forget about the programming or the ancestral line or this current line rather than our galactic line. So usually I love talking about the galactic stuff and the alien stuff. Obviously this all connects because when we make room for all of this, then we make room for the remembrance to come through. So anyways, okay, where do I want to start? Driving back from Kansas City. So this weekend, I had both sides of my dad's family in the same spot. So this is really just his lineage, not both sides of my family, mom and dad. It was just both sides of my dad's family. So new family that came in. So we found out my dad's dad wasn't his real dad. And we got to, unfortunately, not meet my real grandpa. He had passed. If you have followed along in this podcast, you've already known this, but he had already passed. But I have my step uncle and step uncles and cousins. And so I got to meet my step uncle and I got to connect with more of my cousins. So my dad's real side of the family got to meet and mingle with my grandma's side, my dad's mom's side of the family. So when we zoom out at when we zoom in, we go into our own healing. We do our own personal work where our traumas and where our issues, where's our shadows, and we can go really towards the self. It becomes all about you and how you experienced your childhood, all of these things that you're starting to kind of unpack in this healing journey. And it is a journey because it never stops. You literally just go to another state or another layer of the onion. And so it's usually very self-focused first. And then it goes into, oh shit, some of my stuff, some of my trauma, some of my shadow actually isn't mine. And so then you kind of be okay, where does this come from? And then you're oh shit, this is ancestral. These are my ancestral patterns. These are my ancestral traumas, ancestral shadows. And you get to have this deciphering or sifting of whether that's yours or ancestrally it's somebody else's. And when you're living in this generation right now, if you're listening to this and you're feeling connected to this and you're on the spiritual path, you are the person in your family. Could be several people that are deciding to do this, but it's basically this generation, this time right now, everybody's really choosing to be the end conduit. I've talked about being the conduit of healing for your ancestral line. When we choose to wait, I'm not going to repeat this pattern or this family ancestral pattern, you get to fully feel it and it gets to end by you. But I don't know if you can hear the helicopter go fast. So if you choose to end it or as it's ending, you're going to be the one that needs to deal and feel and cope and restructure the pattern, close the loop. With this causes a lot of trauma and pain that we usually don't recognize or we can't really identify. So this leads me into, so that was the weekend. A lot of these loops are closing on their own, where there's like a lot of healing between aunts and cousins, grandparents. There's just a lot of layers of healing that had happened over this weekend where you just felt the shift of the family, or I felt a shift. And it was very much centered around love and compassion, understanding, like just simplest thing is just like everybody's swords was down. Like they're no longer holding on to all this like tightment and resentment. And, it was calm. It was like a deep breath. And so I left this weekend, with starting my bleed, and then led to me coming home, reflecting on ancestral work, thinking about my womb space. And I was like, oh, I should pick up and just kind of flip through this book to see what pops out at me. Ironically, it was this part. Well, it took me freaking 7 minutes to like tell you what I'm going to read to you. But whatever, I'm a chitter chatter. So the original source of shadow patterns, I just like did not know this existed, because I thought like the shadow was just, like I had said before, self and family and unconscious you. But there is another connection to shadow that has to deal with the womb, how you entered the earth through your mother's womb, what you experienced in that womb, and then how the birth was. Pretty much determines a huge shadow aspect of your entire life if you don't choose to heal it. So I'm going to read you parts of this book. Again, it's Womb Awakening. And looks like this if you're looking on video. So this is like another huge layer for me, because it's just very powerful. So there's two different shadow patterns, and it's split up into either lunar shadow, which is the water collapsed pattern, or there's a solar shadow, the react or fire pattern. Usually you'll resonate with one more than the other, and then you could have like one apply more to your love life, or another apply more to your personal life or to your work life. So the idea is to balance both of these shadows and balance the female and the masculine energies within yourself to have a, more healed womb. Anyways, so I'll read you this little blip. In a womb disconnected from the divine feminine, we can feel overwhelmed, afraid, not wanting to stay, not wanting to leave, wanting to die or disappear. We do not want to connect to gravity, to this feeling of being pulled down to earth. Rather than a merging of gifts of water or fire, we can become enriched in the shadow of one of the elements, either drowning in the watery grief with no fire, no heat, or burning, irritated, agitated in an angry fire. Just to preface, this could be a little bit heavy just listening to. So just like take deep breaths, and it's all for healing and learning and observing. So don't feel bad or a type of way if you're like, oh, that's me, or like I do that. First, we have to recognize what we do. And that's when the shadow gets to the opportunity to come to light, and it's no longer something that we're not aware about. So, okay. So in the book, it says, for most babies, this phase brings with it the fear of either being stuck in the womb, trapped forever, or being pushed out and evicted into a cold world. Ultimately, these wounded feelings elicit two responses, which will define our entire behavior patterns for the rest of our life unless we choose to heal it. One is the stuck pattern of the lunar grief, the water element shadow. We decide we don't want to come out. We would rather stay stuck, disappear, contract, make ourselves smaller, hide, drown in the amniotic shadow feeling, die to any desire of life, to shut down in the darkness of depression and inertia. We do not want to face the world and in all of the horror and terror we fear it will bring. The other struggle pattern, so that if you connect to that, what I had just said, that again is the stuck pattern of the lunar grief, which is water. The other struggle pattern is the solar rage, the fire element shadow, and this is the solar shadow. To fight, to struggle, to kick our way out, to escape at any cost, to push through any boundaries with force, to never be trapped or powerless, to do anything to escape the amniotic shadow feeling, to escape into frenzy of doing rather than feeling. We do not want to stay in the world of our mother's womb and her painful emotions. These two patterns can also be described as the collapse shadow pattern and the react shadow pattern. Neither pattern connects us to the flow of life, Both are wounded responses to fear. The split between these patterns dominates the current landscape, the current world landscape. So there's tons of details more about specifically what to experience, how you identify which is which, but usually you can kind of feel into just with that short kind of blurb of like, okay, this is more me or this is more me. And I've considered reading all of it to you, but I mean, it is kind of a lot. So if you are referencing and want to start this journey of the womb awakening, it's on page 2. So, but I can kind of see if I can just do a little bit more of an overview. Okay. Lunar shadow, the collapse pattern. That's the water. So they're too overwhelmed, confused by others to take positive action. They're disconnected to their true feeling state, but they thrive on taking action to disconnect themselves or distract themselves. And this is interesting. And so a world of leaders and followers, masters and slaves is born. Well, just okay. Wow. Okay, they're predominantly a collapse pattern. If you conform to their parents' world, shut down their own feelings, and will do it in order to get by and be safe. They're the world's nice victims, handmaids, helpers, who give their energy to please and support others. They don't like conflict or change or to take direct action or be daring. It's easier to give their power away and prefer to stay in the same comfortable situation than take risks or lead the way. Under pressure, they've shut down, withdraw, hiding, not speaking their true feelings. It's frightening and overwhelming to come out and use their voice, their desires. In physical terms, they often experience chronic illness, weight gain, and lack of energy. Let's see, they withdraw in order to get by. They reduce their expectations of life. They give up what they really want in order to get along and get approval. They tend to be depressed, shy, anxious, and avoid confrontation. They're more in touch with their sadness, their fear, their vulnerability, and tender emotions. And from this place, they can easily sympathize and empathize with others. They tend to be more hyper aware of their shortcomings. They can be good listeners, usually good nurturers. They like to soothe they soothe others. Yeah, they are the people pleasers. So you can see why this is like a shadow. Okay. More of the water. They are sensitive to rejection and give up easily if they meet an obstacle. They undervalue themselves and have difficulties supporting themselves and difficulties in business or taking actions in life. Fear, confusion, and uncertainty are their bedmates. They feel like victims, battered, overwhelmed, and exhausted by life. They often fall prey to narcissists, parents, people who take advantage of their niceness. They feel like they have to take care of others. So that's a lot of the water and lunar shadow. So a few highlights of the solar shadow, the fire, react, are essentially the opposite. Predominantly respond with a react shadow pattern, are more likely to rebel, to escape, to force their will upon the world and others. On surface, they can feel like free spirits, radical activists, creative whirlwinds who are always pushing the envelope in exciting ways. They enjoy and thrive on change, leading the way, pushing their own limits, always chasing new ideas and horizons. These people are afraid of stillness, of dropping deeply into the feminine dimension and the uncomfortable feelings they faced in the womb. Their action and movement is erratic, escapist, and not grounded. They have to be in charge and power, directing, and if they aren't, they feel agitated of the powerlessness and worthlessness that haunted them in the womb. In physical terms, they have a kinetic, restless energy and often have very fit bodies. So they react to traumas of life by shutting down their tender emotions and adopt to coping strategy of pushing ahead in life, trying to push away what they feel difficult, those emotions. They bury their head in the sand from an emotional perspective and can keep on with their exercise plans, self-help plans, business plans, trying to quick fix everything. In the process, they become separated by how they truly feel underneath underneath the mask. They do have fire though. They have tough skin. They're tough. They have determination. They don't give up easily. They push through setbacks. They have courage in the external world. They usually have big business success and they don't mind being seen. They tend to have strong energy and tend to be having a superficial confidence and charisma, but is not easily connected to their tender and loving emotions and hides feelings of low self-worth they have disconnected from. Usually they're prideful and it's difficult admitting to their faults. They have access to masculine, courageous qualities, but dropping into their lunar feminine dimensions feels like a form of death to them. They have everything in the shop window and nothing in the storeroom. So those are the two shadows. I did more of a description than I thought I would, but I find it helpful going through those details. And I have found in in this discovery, in this section of healing or ancestral line, is seeing where these patterns are repeated, but also what happened in your womb. Like, have you ever asked your mother, what was my womb story? How did you feel when you were pregnant? What was the birth like? This section we don't think affects us, but it deeply does. And it's saying that, like, usually how your birth is kind of tends to lead you into which area of the shadow you're in. So just to give you perspective of what my birth story was, some water. I would like to dive deeper into this. I haven't, but I do know that I definitely resonate more with the solar shadow. I know that I came early. I was going to be a premature baby, and my mom had to stay in bed for like 3 months, and I still came 2 weeks early. So I wanted to escape, get out. I know that I was the first one. My mom had no idea what to expect giving birth. And she remembers that, like, she was just like screaming and just, in pain, and didn't know how to do the breath work or anything like that. So she was using her voice a lot and coming out into very like worlds like that. So if you think about it, I am very connected to my throat chakra. I've had a lot of issues with my throat chakra being blocked. And now that it is open, I'm giving a space to speak, communicate. It is also within my soul purpose and my mission. It is my magic in my voice. And it's pretty cool to then hear her using her voice as I'm coming into the world. But also that, I really feel all that restlessness of the antsiness. And, before I've gone on this journey, I even had restless in a permanent way tattooed on my arm. It's one of my first tattoos, actually, when I was like 22. And yeah, it's like all these feelings, I super resonated with that fire aspect, and especially with the emotional part, shoving things down. Really cool, because it correlates with how I lived the majority of my 20s, not feeling. I, distance ran. I just did everything, stayed busy, stayed productive, doing all the self-help, all the business things, all the things to really not feel anything. And it is in that balance that we get to recognize those things, to be like, oh, okay, maybe that's my original shadow pattern. And what is that trying to show me? And how can I start to balance these things? So she continues to say that the great work of the reunion, basically. So discovering our predominant lunar and solar shadow pattern is a big key in our healing journey. Often we can have different responses in different areas of our life, which I had mentioned before, with different people. So we may be a react person in our career, but a collapse person when it comes to relationships. Our patterns may change with different triggers through different ages or during different life events or challenges. The constant is the hidden presence of fear, which is interesting because the shadow, the unseen part, the unknown, the things we don't know about ourselves. And we have a lot of fear around that. Like, what am I going to find out? What do other people know that I don't know? So it's the constant presence of fear, which either inspires our actions or prevents our actions until we come back to the center of our soul. It takes great humility, self-inquiry, and honesty to see where you are embodying the shadows of fire and water. And this is cool because she talks about the world and what we're seeing right now at the state of things. So in culture, men are often forced to exist in the shadow fire, while women flip-flop to the water and the fire. We kind of go back and forth. So you can see this in the macho man who becomes submissive to the new age, or the stay-at-home mom then goes to be a career wife or career girl. Neither one really is like sacred or balanced. You can't be in your sacred feminine or masculine or in union of those things when you're so out of whack. And this also has to do with our womb. So understanding our lunar and solar shadows is the first step to reclaiming their gifts and marrying our feminine and masculine, merging both gifts into a radiant stream of being. Every child is created with the potential for a merged, holistic consciousness of magical innocence, but in the experience of womb time in the current paradigm, fragmented by ancestral and collective fear and grief, disconnects us from this potential. We replay in childhood what we first experienced in the womb. So this is everything in the womb that happens in our childhood, and then what is the underlying themes in our life of that shadow has to do with us, yes, but also our ancestral and the collective. So as we're healing ourselves, it bleeds into then healing the ancestral line, which bleeds in then to healing the collective. So that's why self-healing is literally so fucking important. Okay, so what else do I want to... Okay. So the traumas, to continue, the traumas and memories that are repressed by the thalamus do not go away. They remain trapped in our cellular, energetic, and soulful memory, but we are simply unaware of them. In order to fully dissociate from them, we also have to dissociate from our body, sexuality, and feelings. This is known as in the shamanic world as soul loss. So if you are feeling disconnected in those areas, it's where you're having those traumas and memories that you're not fully feeling or allowing yourself to remember. And again, you can feel dissociated from your body, sexuality, and feelings. So instead of consciously recognizing the feelings of agitations that lie beneath the surface of our being, energies are unconsciously expressed through our body, emotions, and life path through anxiety, depression, anger, agitation, breathing restrictions, body tensions, health problems, troubled relationship, lack of abundance, seemingly external events, conflicts, or accidents. Basically, the shamanic journey is to travel into these lost dimensions to reclaim and retrieve fragmented soul pieces. So it is to become aware of all of these things. At the end of the day, you have the choice. So either you choose to do it or you don't. And in relation to the womb, you can keep trying and feeling a little spark if you keep trying. But if you don't, you can end up becoming lost, drowning, feeling like you're sinking into a watery shadow of the underworld of negative feelings and emotions, feeling trapped, powerless, and a victim of the world, like you're treading water if you stay into the water. And we start to look at the way that we're being. And this is really cool because in many ways, we have this whole thought of like, it's really difficult to change. We think that certain parts of our personality or how we react, how we think, how we communicate is like who we are because that's who we've been. But if you take a step back and you're like, wait a minute, is X, Y, and Z part of me actually a trauma response or a way that this shadow is responding or reflecting into like reality? Is that actually me or is that just like a response of this shadow? And so you get to question kind of different pieces of you and then really get down into that like core question of like, okay, if these things aren't really me and it's this part shadow of me that is coming out, who really am I? Like, what is my authentic me, my authentic self? Who is like the original self? Who am I at the core? And this is where I love to get into. So she says, as we start to enter the sacred marriage of consciousness, we merge our lunar and solar selves into one, gaining access to the wisdom of gifts of both. In the sunlit paths of the waking life, we still have access to the great dark ocean of dream consciousness that birthed us. In the lunar dreamtime paths of the night, we can bring clarity and lucidity of our waking consciousness to interpret our experiences and bring back messages, visions, and insights into the solar world. So it's a process of integrating both. And I just think it's really cool to connect this back to our womb space, where we were in between worlds. Okay, yes, you could argue you don't know really where you're coming from and, whatever, we won't go down a path. But say you don't know where you came before mother's womb. You get into the womb before you're into earth of this life and as a human being on your own, you're in between. You're in an in-between space. You're not fully in, you're not fully out. So you're still affected by both, like your whatever world was going on previously, wherever you were, and then wherever this initiatory phase of the 9 months of your mother being pregnant with you, you're kind of experiencing that too, because you're in between. And that becomes a huge part of our story. And usually we tend to just start or go back to like our inner child with like play. And we think about what did we like to do as a kid? What were we like? And going back to inner child healing. But this goes even back further of the womb healing. Okay, what happened when you were in the womb, but also what happened before you were in the womb? How was mom's womb? What did mom experience? What happened in the womb space before you even decided to get there? Those are also huge things. And then what is your womb doing? If you're a female listening to this, which most of you are, what have you done to clear or heal your womb space? What has entered in your womb energetically that you don't want to be there anymore? And then, okay, so she kind of talks about then how basically our new earth is connecting back to this womb space and then connecting back to like what sacred birth is like all about. And I'll share this because I think this is important as we move forward into the new earth. This is what's going to start to happen more. And you see this with more people wanting to do home births, more holistic things that are happening within the birthing space, and people doing this work of their womb, preparing themselves energetically to have the baby beforehand. So we can heal, she says, we can heal our gestational and birth traumas and unpick the web of wounds that became wrapped around our body and psyche as we were developing. This healing work rewires us back to pleasure and innocence, awakening our spirit. But the key is for a future evolution is to begin conceiving, gestating, and birthing babies who do not have to have the burden of this negative karma to unwind, to bring souls into the world who can flourish from the start, growing in a garden of love. If a baby were born into the womb that had been reset to energetic virginity, original innocence, the bioengineeric form of the body would be able to develop to its true potential as a chalice and receiver of living light. The baby born through an awakened womb would be in a condition far beyond what we are now considered to be enlightened, and it would be as supernatural as it would be fully inhibiting its true blueprint. So it's like as you start to merge and heal your womb space, we get to bring babies into the earth that have to do less of that healing, which is really cool. But you can think about this for your future children if you would want kids, or if you're going to continue to have kids, or if you haven't had them but want them. Focusing on the womb health and womb clearing is really important. And then also, if you've already had kids, it's still the same. You can still do that healing work within your womb space and reflect back to be like, okay, what was mom's womb space? What did she experience? And what can I learn from that? And how are those things also playing out in my life? Which is really wild to think. So these few things have like kind of thread into this. Yeah. And another little quick thing I'll end on is that today I had a colonic earlier today, and it's really important to get those around the full moon, especially if you're doing a parasite cleanse, because they're most active. The parasites are most active around the full moon. So I set myself up. I went to a different practitioner because my schedule didn't match the one I usually go to. So I was like, whatever. Ends up being obviously divine timing, because the conversation I had with this lady was insane. And it helped me get to my next level of healing, tackling more of the trauma that is underneath, the parts that are in the shadow, and the experiences that you can kind of feel that are there, but you can't fully remember the memories of them. And again, this can be something that you personally experienced, or it could be from your lineage. And it's important at that point to be like, okay, did this happen to me? And if it didn't, then I can say, oh, this didn't happen to me. We're going to send this back to that person. But also, boom, we're not doing this again. This isn't repeating. So that a lot of the trauma that we're feeling right now sometimes isn't our trauma, even though it feels like it. And she mentioned a book. I have no reference of this because I haven't read it yet, so I can't give my opinion. But I can tell you what she did reference that was really helpful for her. And she says a book that is called It Didn't Start With You. How Inherited Family Trauma Shapes Who We Are and How to End the Cycle by Mark Woolen. So I'm not super sure how to pronounce that, but It Didn't Start With You. And that's really that book she had mentioned. So I'm going to order these and get into these, but I'll just mention them to you now if it resonates as you're listening. The second book is The Deepest Well, which is Healing the Long-Term Effects of Childhood Adversity. And then a popular one that I definitely know, but have not read yet, which shame on me, is The Body Keeps Score. And that's Brain, Mind, and Body and the Healing of Trauma. So those were 3 books that she had shared with me that was really helpful for like the healing of her trauma. But we're like, it's funny because we're talking about trauma. I was talking about the weekend. I'm releasing in a colonic. So I'm letting go things that don't serve me in process of also releasing shit. And it's just this beautiful conversation that we're able to have. And she's just neutrally talking about the things that happened in her life that are just like insanely epic and horrifying for anybody to go through. But she's like, yeah, this and this happened. And, then I was able to go through this, and now I'm here and I'm doing the healing. So it's just really powerful to hear and share your story, hear other people's story, because it's super impactful. Like her with her sharing her story, then I was able to share parts of mine of like, oh wait, I'm like kind of feeling into this. And I was like, yes, this is the next part that I want to dive into. And she just shared a few books and resources and her process that she went through that is going to be really helpful to me. So remember that when you're having conversations with people. An idea or a memory or a story that comes up in conversation or as you're talking to someone isn't by accident. Usually it's spirit talking through you to them. Usually it's something that is going to help them on their path or unlock something for them. So try your hardest not to hold back on those things, because it could be one simple thing that you're like, oh, I just need to tell you this book that I just read or whatever, could be a huge key to that next person's chapter. So I felt that with this conversation with this lady, and I really just had a great session with her during my colonic. And it was really exciting because I got a lot of parasites out, which felt very satisfying. So anyways, tune into what is your predominant shadow, your original shadow, that could be the cause of a lot of the other shadows that you're experiencing, and see how you can start to integrate both of those sides and take the good things out of both of those. Then it starts to balance the fire and the water in us. It starts to balance the feminine and the masculine in us. And it's just quite interesting that it all comes down to balance and the yin and the yang and the light and the dark. And it's always an in-between space. So sometimes we have to lead into one side more fully, leaning into the darkness more, leaning into the light more, leaning into one side of ourselves more. And that's okay. That's how we find our edges. It's how we find our, bearings of who we are and who we're not. But it really always kind of comes down to that balance of that in between. So if you're struggling in one little area, or with relationship, or with, something that's been on your mind, and with trying to deal with something, usually the answer is somewhere within the balance. And that's really helped me in the last little chunk of time. So usually it's somewhere to do with balance. How can I find balance within this? And that can be very helpful. So if you think this is important or could help somebody, or you think this would be interesting for somebody, I would love it if you could share it with that person. You can always give me a little rating on Spotify or Apple Podcasts if you're listening on there. And if you're watching on YouTube, you can give me a comment or a like, subscribe. Would absolutely love that if you find any of this information helpful or interesting. If you have any questions or want me to dive deeper into this, or in my experience, I'm sure going to head pretty deep into my womb space. So I'm pretty sure I'll probably bring you along for the ride on that. But if you have any specific questions on it, let me know. And until then, I will see you in the next episode. Make sure to stay alien and get weird out there. All right. Much love.